The Indy 500 could have looked wildly different if, in 2012, Indycar had made some different choices. A new set of rules was being introduced, and a range of manufacturers had proposed very different cars to the ones we now have. In this video, we take a look at those design proposals and what Indycar could have been. These are the lost Indycars of 2012. In early 2010, Indycar announced that it was forming a committee to work out what the next generation of the series and the Indy 500 would actually look like. It wanted to replace the aging Dallara IR13 chassis, but it wasn't clear what it would replace it with. The committee was headed by the wonderfully named William R. Looney III of the US Air Force. The committee would be called ICONIC, an acronym of innovative, competitive, open wheel, new, industry related and cost effective. I think they came up with the acronym before they worked out what it stood for. But anyway, to get an idea of what any new car might look like, the IndyCar people turned to the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, and they engaged them to come up with some design studies, which it's fair to say looked rather wild, and they were not really intended to be serious concepts. However, they did give some big cues and indeed clues as to the future direction of IndyCar. The IRL had actually intended to introduce the new cars in 2011, but delayed it by a year for economic reasons. The Indy Racing League, as it then was, had issued a number of key objectives which had to be met for any new car to be considered. There was a clear desire to improve car safety, and at the same time have cars that can race well together in packs on ovals, as well as temporary street circuits and permanent road courses. As well as this, the car must be designed to run at 235 mph at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It was also desirable for the new cars to be cost effective, in other words, as cheap as possible. And as well as that, as light as possible. Lighter for sure than the Dallara IR05, with similar but more efficient aerodynamic performance. They also wanted the cars to have a more modern look, with plenty of space for sponsor logos. Crucially, any new car would have to be American-made, replacing the Italian-built Dallaras, and ideally any manufacturing work should be done in the state of Indiana. Finally, two additional objectives were set, though they were a little bit vague. They wanted the new cars to be relevant to the future of the consumer automotive industry, and also feature innovative technology born on the racetrack that could be translated to consumer cars. They also wanted the cars to be green, as in featuring some sort of environmentally friendly technology, not as in green the colour. 5 companies made proposals, and yes, we are going to go through them one by one, starting of course with the wildest, the Deltawing. Yes, that Deltawing. While Ben Bowlby's unusual looking concept is today best known as a Nissan entry at Le Mans, it was actually first proposed as a car to race in the Indy 500. It was also the first of the new car proposals to be revealed. The whole idea behind this concept was to be able to lap Indianapolis at 235 miles an hour as the specification required, but with a much lower horsepower level. Having a mostly closed wheel design like this significantly reduced aerodynamic drag. In fact, early studies on Bowlby's concept suggested that it had 60% less drag than the Dallara IR05 in speedway configuration. The narrow front track also saved a significant amount of weight. In fact, if the car had been built to Indianapolis specification, it was expected to be about half the weight of the then current Dallara. With no rear wing at all, the car was fully reliant on underbody aerodynamics to generate downforce, which would have the added benefit of reducing the dirty air on shorter ovals and road courses. The jet fighter style tail fin, that was added for lateral stability. Power was to have come from a turbocharged 2-litre 4-cylinder engine, which unusually, along with the transmission, would not be stressed members of the chassis. Instead, they would sit in a sort of cradle at the rear of the car, which could be adapted to accommodate a wide variety of engines. It's worth noting at this point the engines of the 2012 cars had not yet been defined. Oddly, Bowlby and Deltawing never had any intention of actually building the cars themselves. Instead, they planned planned to essentially give it away and publish the entire design online for anybody to look at or edit. Indeed, Bowlby and his business partners stated they would happily have Lola, Dallara, Swift or any other manufacturer produce the design. Ultimately, the Deltawing was not selected for Indycar, but it went on to have a very different and very interesting future, and we will look at that in a different video. Next up is Ben Bowlby's old employer, Lola. Lola was one of the big names in racing car construction at the time. In fact, it had competed in IndyCar up until its infamous split and the creation of the Indy Racing League, and it had continued in Champ Car right up until the Panos DP01 was introduced in 2007. Lola Cars desperately wanted to get back into the US open wheel market, but at the same time as it was developing its IndyCar proposals, it was also trying to create its own Formula One team, but that is a different story. Lola's proposal was what it called the total package, with cars of different configurations sharing the same monocoque and mechanical components. The two packages could be chosen by different teams or manufacturers, but both had similar levels of performance. The only differentiation was visual. As you can see here, the areas that could be changed out between the two concepts were the top of the nose, the front wing and the end plates, the roll hoop, the dorsal fin, the rear wing, and the small wheel protection elements ahead of the rear wheels. The overall design was very conventional, as you might expect from Lola, with pushrod suspension all round, a fully stressed engine and gearbox, and fully exposed wheels. Safety was a key consideration of the project, with the cars featuring an extended front impact and nose structure, as well as high specification side impact, rear impact and rollover structures. Raised cockpit sides and F1 style padding also was featured. Keeping the cars on the ground was a key focus for all of the proposals for 2012 IndyCars, and Lola used its in-house CFD capability to develop a design which it claimed would be more stable in yaw. Notably, the CFD studies also found an undisclosed opportunity in the design of the underbody aerodynamic package, which Lola claimed would minimise the wake of the car. Staying on the topic of safety, some thought had been given to preventing cars from interlocking wheels at speed. Note how the rear floor flares outward and has a raised tip at the edge, just ahead of the rear wheel. From the rear, you can also see that the car had elements extending from the base of the rear wing end plate behind the wheel. These again were to stop that interlocking wheel moment happening. It does though seem a little bit optimistic to me that these small little elements would stay in place in a car-to-car impact, but Lola was known at the time for making solid racing cars. The English constructor accepted that to get the contract it would have to open up a US subsidiary in Indiana, but it did state that it was willing to do so, and subsequently set up Lola USA. One area that Lola uniquely explored was utilising the same chassis for the Indy Pro Indy Light series, replacing the Dallara IP2 which was introduced in 2002, as it used in the main IndyCar series. The idea was that with both series using the exact same chassis, the monocoque, the bit the driver sits in, Indy Lights teams could simply purchase an upgrade kit to allow them to compete in IRL races, or even attempt to qualify for the Indy 500 itself. This would have been much cheaper than having to buy a whole new car if the team or driver wanted to step up. Lola did admit in its presentations that it knew its proposals were perhaps not as futuristic as some of the others, but it did fully intend to offer some more futuristic options when the economy improved. Ultimately, Lola's bid for the 2012 IndyCar contract was unsuccessful, and that was a massive blow to the English company, which ultimately collapsed financially and closed its doors in 2012. Had it won the IndyCar contract, it's likely that the company would have survived. Recently, though, the Lola company has been revived and looks to have a bright future. Links to Lola are also found with the Bat. Not British American Tobacco or anything built by Bruce Wayne, Bat was essentially the home team for the IndyCar proposal campaign. Former Galma designer Alan Mertens had teamed up with former Reynard and Lola designer Bruce Ashmore, as well as legendary race engineer Tim Wardrop. The first letters of their names gave the organisation its name: Bruce, Alan, Tim, B-A-T. Bat. At first, the project didn't look to be the most serious, as its concept car renderings were not at the same level seen by some of the other contenders, though that did swiftly improve. The curvaceous design was mechanically fairly conventional, with a double wishbone layout on all four corners and a fully stressed engine and gearbox layout, but the monocoque was the real focus for Bat. Bat started its project by looking at the safety of the cars, and met with Indianapolis surgeon Dr. Terry Trammell and IndyCar's safety and technical directors. This This enabled the team to establish the safety features of its design, particularly around the cockpit and driver position. And that was the core of the BAT project. They wanted to have the safest cockpit available, while at the same time positioning the driver in such a way that he could drive the car in a more aggressive fashion. The unconventional looking design was shaped not only for aerodynamic performance, but also to have the strength to sustain minor knocks during a race. Like other designs, the wheels were largely protected from interlocking, although the design did still retain a Coke bottle shape in the side pods at the rear. The downforce was generated more from the floor of the car, or what the team called the centre body profile. In what's sounding like a rather familiar story, the downforce of the car was generated more from the floor of the car, or what the team called the centre body profile, rather than the wings. The plan for the car was to have it built entirely in Indianapolis, hoping to take advantage of a state subsidy which the then Governor Mitch Davis had already hinted at. That subsidy, though, never made it to BAT, and the design was never selected. But if you thought the BAT seemed like an outsider, the car, or series of cars that the fans absolutely loved, was really the true outsider. Swift Engineering was a multi-industry engineering company based in San Clemente, California. It was owned by former racing driver and Indycar driver Hiro Matsushita. Unlike the other bids, Swift seemingly had no real intention of building its cars in Indianapolis or even the wider Indiana area. It already had an established race car manufacturing facility in California, which at that point was supplying and maintaining the one-make cars for the Formula Nippon Championship in Japan. Swift made a number of design proposals, each of them quite spectacular. Although these were not mere concept renders, there was real research behind them, and key to each of the Swift concepts was something the company called mushroom busters. These were aerodynamic parts mounted at the rear of the car, aimed at cleaning up the wake of the cars, and in turn making it easier to follow. The mushroom that was being busted is a reference to the shape of the wake when seen sliced up in CFD images. Swift claimed to have used a version of this technology on its Formula Nippon cars, but it also claimed that the Indycar version would be much more advanced and much more effective. Like most of the others, in mechanical terms, the Swift concepts were essentially all the same, with conventional pushrod layouts all around in terms of the suspension, and although there was not a lot of detail, it seemed likely that a Ricardo transmission would be used on the car as it had been on the Formula Nippon. Overall though, the Swift proposals were very much more a bodywork development exercise, and they really showed what the concepts could be if you really went out there. One major objective was to reduce the reliance on conventional wings. Yes, the same story as all of the other cars, and they wanted to rely more on the underfloor. Swift had taken that to another level though, and some of the Swift designs featured what you must consider to be more fins than wings. Notably, the Swift proposals didn't go as far as some of the other designs, taking steps to prevent interlocking wheels, though on some of the other Swift designs there was more protection than any other car. Some of the Swift ideas also showed an exposed engine, not for any performance reason, but simply because the car designers thought it was cool, and I can absolutely support that. Detailed design work, though, was not done on any engine installations whatsoever, partly because those 2012 engine rules hadn't been written at that point, so all Swift had worked out is that they could do a stressed, semi-stressed or non-structural installation. It was kind of up to Indycar, but they felt that a fully stressed installation was not only the most likely option, but probably the best option. Another interesting feature on some of the Swift designs was what it called Swift lights. They were a set of light panels made of 1mm thick plastic, which could be used to display various information on the car, such as the fuel level, or the throttle percentage, or even just the car's position in the race. It's an idea not all that different to the panels used on recent McLaren Formula One cars. Swift's slick graphics and innovative ideas were the clear favourite with the fans, but perhaps the designs were just a bit too futuristic for the IndyCar community, or perhaps Swift's insistence of staying in California was a bit too much for the Indiana natives. None of Swift's designs were selected. Swift is no longer very active in motor racing. It's very active though in the defence sector. However, its Formula Nippon design was later replaced by a Dallara, and it's that Italian company we turn our attention to now. It's fair to say that Dallara has dominated international motorsport for many years. If you see an open-wheel race car outside of the Formula One World Championship, then it was probably made by Dallara. Yeah, and I know one of the Formula One cars is also made by Dallara. Dallara proposed 3 different designs for the 2012 Indycar project, none of which were exactly like what was finally selected, but each had elements that we now see as familiar. The designs range from being quite conservative to quite radical. The first concept actually looked like quite a mild evolution of the IR05, and even the nose shape was quite similar, but it had fairly chunky front wing end plates to protect the front wheels, and a floor extension to protect the rears. It looked to have a lot in common though with the IR05, including suspension layout and likely the transmission. Notably, Dallara refused to design any concepts which didn't include a fully stressed engine. The second concept from Dallara looks like a more exciting version than the first, with a more angular stylistic bodywork package. It also features more extreme variations of all of those bodywork features on the first concept. Note the bodywork element ahead of the rear wheel and the shape of the leading edge of the side pod. I'm not really convinced by the design of the front wing end plates. They do look like they're perfect for puncturing rear tyres. Notably, neither of the first 2 Dallara proposals features any protection for the rear wheels either, but the third version does. I'm not sure why all the images I have of the Dallara proposals from 2012 are really rubbish in terms of resolution, but it's all I had on my hard drive, so sorry about that. But this version, the third proposal from Dallara, looks a lot more like what they actually wanted to build, and it's got some clear elements about it that do look a bit like the eventual DW12 car itself. The almost enclosed rear wheels would clearly stop interlocking, and the big front wing extensions would serve the same purpose with the front wheels. There's also perhaps a little bit of a hint of the Deltawing about it as well, aesthetically speaking at least. According to the press releases, all of Dallara's proposals would have been lighter and cheaper than the IR05. They all apparently featured underbody designs as well, which would improve the wake. So big a difference there. History tells us, of course, that it was Dallara which was ultimately selected as the single chassis supplier, but for a time there were suggestions that Indycar would revert to being a multi-chassis competition where manufacturers could compete with one another. Sadly, that was not to be, but just imagine all of these different concepts competing with each other in the Indy 500. That would have been a sight to behold. Before we look at the final Dallara design selected, it's just worth noting another what might have been story. The panel's DP01 in Indy 500 specification. It was never submitted as a proposal for the 2012 IndyCar project, but at Elan Motorsport Technologies the concept at least got as far as the wind tunnel model stage. The final design from Dallara didn't really look much like any of the designs submitted by the Italian manufacturer, but elements of it did carry through, as I mentioned, especially from that third concept. Though it did look like the core chassis concept did carry over. Note the shape of the nose, although that sharp sculpting on the top of it was dropped by the time the car was actually built. Looking at the Indianapolis specification IR12 at its launch, you can see some of those concepts clearly. The bulges around the rear wheels, for example, and the bodywork behind the rear wheels. Notably, as I mentioned, the nose had become smoother, flatter, and a bit more rounded than the concept had proposed. The road course version was a sight to behold and featured many design elements not seen in the concept sketches or on the final cars. The drag-reducing mirror housings were a very nice touch, but they never made it past testing. And that rear wing, that's quite something, and it too, surprisingly, never made it onto the final car. Much of the testing of the IR12 was done by Dan Weldon, though sadly he never got to race it. He suffered a fatal crash in the last race of the 2011 season, and in his honour, Dallara renamed the new car the DW12, a fitting tribute. As Indycar once more looks to the future and the introduction of a new car, what would you like to see included, if anything, from these 2012 concepts? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this 500-mile tale of cars that never actually got built, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you soon, somewhere on Pit Road.